Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today we are joined by Wojtek Buczynski. Wojtek, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ricardo. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
It's a pleasure. Now, Wojtek, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Okay. My name, as Ricardo introduced, is Wojtek Buczynski. I'm a co-founder of Fast Audit AI, which we'll probably touch on in a moment. What can I say? Polish born. I spent most of my adult life in London. I did all my education here, and most, if not all, of my career was in fintech and financial services with the 2 year stint in consulting. So I've always been part of financial services industry. My education is in that area. So I did my master's at London Business School, and I'm currently doing a PhD in AI in ethics applications and use cases of AI in financial services at the University of Cambridge. And up until now, I've always been a corporate person. So all my previous employers were large or very large corporates. So this is very much a debut for me on the entrepreneurship scene.
And what got you started? What made you take the plunge from, having a nice, stable corporate job to actually deciding to launch a startup?
Well, I mean, the thing about nice, stable corporate job is that never know when it ends, and you don't, I mean, you get your 3 month warning, but that's about it. But it was really a combination of factors, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I always had some sort of, let's say, exotic respect for people who started their own businesses. And I always felt that I'm the last person who will ever be able to do it. And I sort of made peace with the fact that it will, once I'm on my deathbed, it will be like, well, I wish I had done it. So I guess that was eating at me to some extent. It was what got me started was a combination of factors. So the first was a recession and a change of luck in my corporate career, but that wasn't, I would say, the defining factor. It was almost, it kind of felt like it was the right time. And also it sort of seems like I don't even believe in these things, but it seems like the universe was very strongly nudging me in that direction because I wasn't really feeling keen or willing to go back to corporate after I finished with corporate. It felt like I think I'm done, at least for now. I want to try something a little bit different. So that was the first thing. And the other was that I connected with my friend from London Business School who was considering an idea for a business that we were discussing for quite some time when I was still in my high paying corporate job. And it just felt like such a wonderful idea, which I appreciate is something all founders think. It's a bias or delusion. Nobody thinks my idea is crap. Everybody thinks my idea is wonderful. But same here. I thought this idea is so good that I just have to give it a try. So it was a combination of decisions and factors beyond my control. And I don't know, curiosity. At least I won't have that regret the moment I'm dying. It's like, whether it works or not, and of course I hope it does, I'll be like, well, at least I tried.
And what does it does? Tell the audience about it.
Pardon?
What does your startup do exactly?
All right. Okay. So for those who haven't hear me pitch at one of your events, Ricardo, it's what Fast Audit does. It detects accounting anomalies in financial statements instantly using a combination of rules-based and machine learning at a fraction of cost of current alternatives such as Big Four.
Okay, that's quite impressive. And so does he how does it work? Can you integrate with any existing financial software? Is this a standalone solution?
No, this is totally standalone and probably intentionally because we don't, having worked in enterprise, the procurement process sometimes lasts longer than many startups exist. So we don't necessarily want to take this route. No, the underpinning of it is fresh take on the concept of financial statement audit analysis and due diligence, coupled with some really clever accounting science. So what we do is we take audited financial statements as filed with some sort of national body. So in the UK, that's Companies House, and most countries have their equivalent. So these statements are publicly available. And what we do is we put the companies in like-for-like clusters of companies that follow similar business activities, and it's not entirely based on the SIG code or any other sector code. It's actually based on the activity. This is where our IP and machine learning come into play. And then we look at a couple of key metrics on the financial statements and compare the particular company, company X, against its peer group. And we show statistical outliers, the ones that are likely to be so much of an outlier that it's attention worthy. It's not that somebody is, 1 or 2% deviating from its cluster mean. It's like somebody who's 1 or 1.5 standard deviations away. And of course, that can be indicative of different things. So many times it can be a very good indication of potential accounting irregularities. And this was part of our pre-launch research. In the UK, we have this body called Financial Reporting Council, which is a regulator of sorts for the audit profession. And whenever there is an accounting or audit issue or scandal, they investigate it and then they decide whether it was really a failure in the audit process or not. And in the past several years, they took on, I think, about 60 or 70 cases, some of which ended up with the ruling that it was genuine failure of audit process and some of them not. And every company that got in some sort of trouble, for Carillion, Patisserie Valerie, or many others, our system just flags it up. It goes, it's not just one red flag, it's several. So there is very strong back-tested rigor to it. And the other thing that it picks up is also companies where there is no irregularity per se, but just good companies that run into genuine trouble. So the good example here could be Made.com, which some of you may remember from the lockdown times. They were very, very popular for about a year or two. They were making bespoke home furnitures, particularly sofas. And there was a time when their sofas were really, really popular, and they were cool, they were funky. It was like IKEA but cool. But as lockdowns ended, people resumed much more buying on the high street, which Made.com wasn't entirely prepared for, and the company ran into very serious trouble. And I think it's been liquidated now, and whatever was left was acquired by Next. So we would pick up on this as well, which is why we use the term anomaly. So it's not like everything we pick up is a fraud. What we pick up is something that should be paid attention to by a professional auditor or by due diligence people.
So there's actually quite a lot of potential for it, because obviously there's the people who should be looking at these things, but there's also investors and the likes, right? That if they can have that data, then they can make a better informed decision of if they're going to invest or not, if it's a stable company or not, right?
Yes, thank you. So indeed, we're quite hopeful it has potential. So there are two primary target groups that we're aiming for. So the first one is audit and audit adjacent people, where the system, it's not about replacing anyone, by the way. It's not one of these cases, people versus AI. I don't even believe in that. And the research doesn't really corroborate that very well either in the academia. It's more about helping spot those irregularities to save auditors a lot of time. So they still need to filter them through their knowledge and experience and investigate them. It's just we show you this is where you should probably pay your attention to. And the other side of the market, which is the one that seems to be very proactively approaching us, people who get usually sold on the system very, very, or on the concept, almost on the spot, is people on the investment side, and particularly in the private investment space. So private equity, private credit, those people that need to analyze a lot of companies, including private ones. Because if you're thinking about acquiring a company or extending credit to them or engaging in any business to them, you should be able to ascertain their financial stability as best as you can. And the truth is that unless you're a FTSE 100 or one of the really, really big companies, there's not even that much research coverage on listed companies, and there's nothing at all on private ones. So it's filling that void.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And going back to your change in careers and lifestyles, how was it? It must have been quite a challenge, going from very nice corporate job to then launching your own startup. What type of changes have you had in your mindset and your way of doing things from one job to the other?
Okay, so first of all, in the name of being completely honest, it was a very nicely paying job. Whether it was particularly my last, whether it was very nice per se, we will save that for another conversation, probably with a therapist in the room. So, Ricardo, I don't know whether it's just me, and I don't want to sound pompous, but it's really like a very different life experience. I mean, I appreciate that it sounds like very sort of new age or whatnot, but it really is. So, the first thing you notice very, very quickly is, where's my income? That one you pick on very, very quickly. And my advice to all the founders, and I appreciate it's the kind of advice that's easier to give than take, is you must have some savings. You must have something to live off when you launch your startup. And I'm not even talking about investing this money in startup. I'm talking about the money to pay your rent or mortgage and your groceries. That myth about a broke founder, it's a myth. Everybody needs to do their food shopping. So, that's something I feel very strongly about. So that you notice immediately. It's like, oh, the money is still outgoing, but it's not incoming. That's a very unpleasant feeling. But, Ricardo, it really is kind of like, going to bed a human and waking up something like a dolphin. You're still a mammal, but it's a completely different environment, completely different experience. Everything is different. It's really quite difficult to put in words, at least for me.
Are you happier now that you're a dolphin using the same?
I'll be happier when I'm a funded dolphin, or comfortably funded dolphin. But it's my decision. I own it, and I'm certainly not ready to throw in the towel yet. It's it takes a pair of really big ovaries to start up to set out on your own, and I have such enormous respect for everyone who does, because it is an act of monumental courage and audacity, and to some extent, it requires a delusional level of self-belief, because statistically the odds are against us.
Yeah.
So it's a cliche and a patronizing one, but it isn't for everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that. You need to have something in you to do it, because it's not about intellect. I knew it even beforehand, but I know it even more profoundly, Ricardo. It's not about your brain, it's about your stomach. How many unreplied emails from VCs can you handle? How many calls with VCs that end up in 15 minutes that you just know were unsuccessful? All these kind of things. How many events can you go to and, sort of bare your soul in front of complete strangers, as people do at the startup events? It's not just about the intellect, trust me.
I know. I 100% agree with you. It's about the gut you have, and your resilience and your ability to keep on pushing forward when everything keeps on failing. And you think, no, I still think this is going to work. Of course, you take on the feedback, because you always must take on the feedback, right? There's no way around that. But you take on the feedback and think, okay, we can still push forward. So that's a whole different type of craziness mindset, if you want to call it. But ultimately, that's how progress is done, right? If you think about great human inventions, let's take the light bulb, for example. There's a whole story Thomas Edison was writing down, okay, I found 10,000 ways of not making a light bulb. And it's kind of like that when you're starting a business, isn't it? So it's a big challenge. But,
I think that there is a school of thought that Edison actually shamelessly stole the idea from Nikola Tesla, but
not for the light bulb, though. I don't think I think for a lot the currents and stuff like that. There's obviously Tesla worked for him, because at the time there was a controversy between AC or DC, which one to use. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you still go to New York to this day, they still use, if I'm not mistaken, DC, where they should be using AC. So DC works quite well for small distances, but doesn't work well for long distances. Or it could be the other way around, but that's kind of it. And Edison believed that it should work the one for the small distances. So when you go to New York, you still have the Edison power plants that only work, and they work well, but they only work for small distances, not for long distances. So Tesla ultimately was right. Edison was wrong. But time proved each one their dues, I guess. But I was about to ask you one thing, which is, how do you deal with all these tough challenges that you face as a founder?
I feel tempted to answer not very well. It's
well, that's okay. That's an honest answer.
I mean, Ricardo, in my past life, I've been on side of the desk a mental health advocate, and that is always something that I felt very strongly about. So I don't want to give like a one-liner cliche reply. So first of all, I strongly advise anyone against doing things solo, because that is nigh on impossible. And it's not because somebody doesn't have sufficient intellectual aptitude. I just don't think that very many people can manage the amount of resilience, can master that amount of resilience that it takes. Some days you carry your partner, some days your partners carry you. I think that when you only have yourself to carry, this challenge might be just too much for anyone's soul and stomach to succeed. So my advice for anyone is it's better to consider it a team sport, and of course try to choose your team wisely. And I think that the other thing is, I think it's one thing to love your idea, and it's quite different to be in love with your idea. And we see this at events sometimes. Ricardo, you have sometimes 20 to 30 pitches at the startup event, and most of the people there are perfectly down to earth and flexible. But there is a subgroup of founders who are so obsessively in love with their idea that they're not interested in any feedback from anyone, because they reinvented perfection and they don't want to hear a single word about it. So I kind of advise against that, because even if you have a really great idea, somebody can just make it a little bit better. It's really not, not going to diminish anybody's abilities or anybody's credit if you take a little bit of feedback. So there's definitely that. Not taking things personally helps, but it's not something I'm particularly good at. I take weather personally, I take everything personally. But my co-founder, I'm exceptionally lucky in that respect. He is a seasoned entrepreneur, and he's been doing this for several years. And he told me actually just yesterday is, after you face the abyss a couple of times, you get used to it. I'm like, well, I'm facing the abyss for the first time, so thank you for the thumbs up. So my advice, which I think is a little bit idealistic, is just try to build the dream team around you. And I don't mean it has to be very many people. 2 or 3 is 4 is probably ideal size for a startup. And I have this personal belief that if you have people around you who just work and click with you, then if one idea falls, you can just pick yourself up and start with another one. If your team collapses, you're left with nothing. No startup, no idea, and probably adversely affected mental health. So, and it's such an easy advice to give, find yourself a good team, but that's what I think maximizes your chances of making it through, and having team resilience that is greater than any individual's resilience.
What do you do personally when you're having a really bad day? When nothing seems to go your way? And by the way, bad day can be bad weeks.
Oh, okay.
So what do you do to get you back on track and get you back on that, founder mentality and making sure that you keep on pushing forward?
So first of all, a bad day can be a bad week, can be a bad month, or an overall terrible 2024. I mean, I don't know a single person who would say, yeah, 2024 was the year to live. I mean, surviving through 2024 for anyone seems like an extreme sport. It's really not the best year on record. I don't have any great advice. What I do, I'm not lying to anyone, least of all myself. It's fine. It's awesome. No, it's not fine at all. It's terrible. So at least I'm not bottling things inside. And, you can still do things when you're not feeling great. It's, I'm not trying to be like, it's been an absolutely terrible, year, but I'm going to bring myself up, play Gloria Gaynors, I will survive, and look my best. No, you just have to.
Good choice.
Thank you. If you can't run, it's like what Celine Dion said in her documentary recently. If at some point you can't run, just crawl. And I don't want to sort of exaggerate with comparisons with somebody who's suffering from a very serious medical condition. It's about the principle, right? At least I'm trying to be honest with myself and people around me. It's like, are things great? No. But I will still, I still have my to-do list.
But and I will go on.
Yes. I will do as much as I can. And also there's this thing which is a cliche of cliches. It's if my body, okay, oh my God, that sounds so pretentious, but If I feel exhausted, I will just go to sleep. And I don't care whether it's 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. because I'm actually a night person. I will just get a couple of hours of sleep. That really makes such a monumental difference. It puts a little bit of distance between the last thing that upset me. It's like a little bit of a tiny fresh start. And also be realistic and compassionate with one another. If like some days, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but I feel there's so many adversities. Like I can't do this today, then I don't. I just catch up on sleep, and I'm overwhelmed today, but I will be a little more stronger tomorrow, and I just pick up the following day.
Maybe that's the first lesson an entrepreneur needs to find out by themselves, which is when you move from a corporate job, you have deadlines, and there's someone who's always managing you, regardless of what position you're in, unless you're the CEO. But then even the CEO needs to, be accountable for the investors and the stockholders, the board. And then you need to do stuff. You keep on doing things. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you focus on doing the stuff you need to do, but at the best time possible. And if that means you need to go for, a little nap or sleep or exercise or have a drink and talk with some friends, that's okay, because the next time you pick up that task, you're going to be full on, you're going to be able to deliver. So, I think it's a hard lesson to learn, but at the same time, when people stop feeling guilty about it, the better it is, right? Because we're human. Everyone needs to do that.
I generally think that starting as a founder, particularly as a first time, is a very introspective and self-learning experience, because it is so profoundly different to salaried employment. It's it's really like go to bed a human, wake up a dolphin. There's a lot to learn. So I suspect from observation and sort of from culture that some founders, particularly men, make this mistake of being their own slave driver. If you don't work 16 hours per day, you're not trying hard enough. And it takes a certain age and a certain set of life experience to realize that it's completely and utterly false. Less is actually more with work as well, because I know that when I'm rested, I can work like a machine, like a Terminator. And I don't need to put in 16 hours because I wouldn't be able on that level. I put in 6, and I'm
productive on those 6 hours. I think there's something called flow. It's a step, or I think it's a book or a study. I don't recall that correctly. Actually, by a Polish American. Fun fact. And they measure two workers. One at a factory that would work 8 hours a day straight on. The other that would work on flow states. So they would work standing up, then they would sit down, rest, then they'll get up again, then they sit down and rest, so forth, so on. And what they found out was actually quite impressive. Even though the standing worker had supposedly the same number of things to do, he did less than the one who was taking small breaks in between. And then they found that when you work on your flow states and you work at your optimal capacity, you actually end up doing a lot more stuff. Even though it seems like, why are they resting now? They should be working. Actually, no. If you work super hard when you're supposed to be working super hard and then rest afterwards, you get a lot more stuff done. But it's hard getting to that stage, right? It's quite a challenge.
I do agree. And funny that you should mention this. I have literally just today finished this book.
What's the book?
Titled Scarcity, and it takes some of the concepts you've mentioned a little further. It really expands on the concept of bandwidth, which all of us understand intuitively. And also slack, as in having intentional free space to absorb shocks that will invariably come. It's one of the trillion things that any entrepreneur or even, a self-employed person needs to learn, because for me to work, like my preferred hours are night hours, which, was perfectly fine in corporate. It was net benefited the company if I worked at 3 a.m., but I was still expected to show up at 9 a.m., which didn't work out terribly well for me. So now I can work until 5, 6, or 7 a.m., but after that I go to sleep. So I operate probably on like Hawaii time or Sydney. But, I work the hours that work for me.
And how, you just mentioned a book. I'm curious on this. What's your latest book you just mentioned? But what book do you recommend for people to read as an entrepreneur?
Actually, it's sorry, I don't get any commission, and it's next to me because I just finished it. It's this one. It's quite a profound book because it teaches.
What's the name? Because it is a podcast, so some people will not be looking at the video, so you need to tell them what it
Fair.
is.
So the book is titled Scarcity, and the authors are Mulantan and Shafir.
Mhm.
And it's about something that I was experiencing or very aware of since my 20s, is that in the periods of stress, my mind would feel like I'm in a sort of mental headlock. My focus was so narrow and short. My memory was so much worse. I wasn't able to plan ahead. It was very much, how do I make my rent this month? How do I fight some fires? So it's, I think, the first time that researchers have looked at what having insufficient amount of resources, and it can be time or money or focus, how debilitating it is, and how we tend to neglect it because the only lack that we really pay attention to in life is money. But it's much more complex than that, and it shows us that the lack of time, money, or in some instances, if somebody's on a diet, food, the effect it can have on a person's intellect are so profound. And it's something I can relate to so acutely, because even now I'm I'm operating under the state of acute stress, whether I like it or not. My ability to focus or plan long term is so much more limited than when I was making good money working for corporate. I obviously hope it won't last forever, but it's quite amazing to realize that it's not just me. There is scientific research to back it up, and it sort of changes the way I think about time management.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs now that you've been on a journey? People listening in, which hopefully tons of them will listen in. What advice would you give to them?
There are so many, and so many of them are unoriginal. So my first small personal advice is, don't fly solo. I mean, I know one or two people who are doing it and successfully, but I think they are outliers. I strongly believe in entrepreneurship being a team sport. I also want to, yes, another thing, I think it's a myth. Maybe it's not as prevalent now as it was like 10 or 15 years ago, but I think that most of us are seeing that startup needs to be in the state of an ongoing boxing match. It's like, a shout fest between a couple of dudes, whose idea will trump the other person's idea. Whereas I think that in a startup, it actually really pays to be flexible and agreeable, because almost nothing is so important as to risk breaking the team over it. But it's also a measure of a good team. If somebody is very binary, it's my way or no way, I'm not sure they're success material for teamwork or for entrepreneurship. If people are flexible and agreeable and not really precious about their egos, then I think it helps a lot. I don't even want to start talking about rejection because I could write a book about it. But again, it's a cliche, but I don't think that very many people out there, except, I don't know, ex-military, are really prepared with their stomachs for not just the amount of rejection, but mostly the amount of ghosting and indifference they will face. So to get a rejection email is already quite successful. It means that somebody actually read your email. Whereas I think that 80% of the case, if not more, you will be just promptly ignored, be left in the limbo. So, learning to take rejection, I think you can only learn it empirically. It's not something you can learn from.
And as we're nearing the end of the podcast, if people want to reach out to you and find out more about your company and yourself, how can you do so? What's the best way?
Okay, so the company's website is fastaudit.ai. So that's the quickest way to reach us. And my contact detail is Wojtek.Buczynski at Fast Audit AI. So you'll probably need to put this in writing somewhere, Ricardo, because of the spelling of.
It shows up on the notes, yeah.
Of my name, but I'm also another way to find me, which actually some people did, is one thing that is really big in London startup ecosystem is the WhatsApp groups, including yours. There's a total of a handful of WhatsApp groups that are usually affiliated to some sort of event series or a group of people, such as, chief among them being yours.
You can always use LinkedIn as well, right? That also
Yeah,
works.
you can. Obviously, it's just that once again, the spelling of my last name. But I really encourage people to make full use of those WhatsApp groups, both when it comes to looking for something, but also if ever you can help someone or enable them or answer a question, put in a recommendation, or so many people are trying, really pouring their hearts out to try get the LinkedIn algo on their side, and that algo is not always very kind. So it's quite routine that people on your group and on others put in links to their LinkedIn posts and please show it some love. I mean, that is really the cheapest way to earn some good karma, because if you like somebody's post, that helps the algo. If you repost it, that helps as well.
Yep.
And there's really a lot of valuable activity. And the third thing where you can find me is I go to events, like I'm at your event almost every time. So, the startup events, check it out. And others as well. Again, it's not particularly original, but those events, some of them really work. I mean, most of them, because I think that most people in the startup ecosystem are, very, very supportive, and they almost wear their heart on their sleeve. It's generally, in corporate, everyone's your competition. In startup, not so much, because if somebody wants to start, I don't know, a femtech startup or an edtech startup, they're not my competition at all. If there's something I can do to help them, I'll be more than happy to.
Sounds like a plan, and I 100% agree with you. Wojtek, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure interviewing you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. All the best. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.